Good afternoon, one and all. It's time for some painting. See right here that I've got an Abyssal Dwarf Grotesque champion, fully primed up to the eyeballs and beyond. Not only him, but also we've got the rest of the Grotesques as well, not just a champion. This guy's obviously not got quite as an impressive stand, but I've only got so many of these spray tops to stick them on. So, just a little note before we start. Things I use as handles, you'll notice if we look underneath, there are actually several pins there. So those pins are stuck into the feet of this model, and then when I'm finished they will be stuck in the base, the cork on the base as well. And these guys, because they're on such tiny things, these have actually got coin stuck inside, so it weighs them down a bit so they're not going to fall over. Not that much of an issue with this light resin, but when you've got metal miniatures that can help a lot. Got a couple of people in the chat already. Got Stew Rat and Deep Red in there, obviously experiencing different time zones based on their greetings. But before we get to these guys, because they're only just primed, so we're actually going to start with their base before we get onto those suckers today. So this is where we left off yesterday, bases. So we're actually going to apply the earth crackling effect, and then maybe by the end of this broadcast we'll be able to see some progress on that as well, because it takes a very long time for it to fully set and dry into the way it looks when it's finished. So we're going to take the Citadel Mordant Earth Paint and we're going to apply this onto these lava areas now, and then we'll move on to the actual grotesque miniatures after that. So we'll start with the small base. And we go. So what kind of brush do I want to use? We want a bit of precision, but it's not a brush that I actually value in terms of a point, because this is quite thick, succulent paint here, and I imagine it could possibly mess up a tiny little detail brush, for instance. So we're not going to use that. We're going to use this nice big chunky one that's already lost its point. So let's give it a good shake. By the way, for anyone who's interested, there is going to be a live stream tonight about in 5.5 hours time-ish. And that's going to be me and Mr. Remington Steele playing some more Warhammer End Times Vermintide for the PC. So if anyone wants to tune in for that, then about 5.5 hours from now. So UK time it's going to be about 8:30. Although knowing Mr. Remington, it'll be more like 8:40. He is fashionably late. So I'm going to start applying this now. And you don't have to be too careful with this. The thicker you apply it, I've found, the bigger the chunks will come out. If you apply a really thin coat of this, you'll get very fine lava underneath, with the crackled earth being in tiny pieces top. So I try and apply pretty much a medium coat all over, fairly even, but it doesn't matter if it's not even. Just trying to cover everything, but even if there's a little tiny bit of red showing through, it doesn't matter, because when it dries there's going to be some of the lava showing through anyway. That's the whole idea. But perfection is not necessarily the name of the game. Just splatting it all on there. No one's used, or if someone hasn't used these paints before, these technical earth crackling paints, there are other brands available, not just the Citadel, but I would definitely recommend giving them a go. They do catch people's eye for very minimal effort. Splatting that lava area here. While I'm doing this painting, I will be referring to the chat box if anyone wants to post any questions or comments in there. See it out the corner of my eye while I'm doing. It's going to be very exciting actually making a start on the Grotesques today. Nearly run out of black spray as well, but that doesn't matter because I've got this bad boy, which is just as good being brushed on as any other kind of primer. especially in these times when maybe you can't get your hands on sprays. I know there are some regulations about posting those things, at least in this country. Can't get your hands on sprays. I recommend that stuff. Okay, we're done with that base now. We're just going to put that off to one side, and then you'll see that in a couple of hours, and we'll see if there's any progress on the crackling effect. Sometimes it takes longer than that. So I'm just going to wait for the moment and move on to the big juicy one now. Exciting. Maybe the last batch of units that I do for the Abyssal while. I've got the Grotesque Horde here, the Champion, and I've finished those. I'm not sure if I'm going to paint any more for a little while. I've got some more heroes to paint, but I might put them on hold for a while because that's not it. I may focus more on painting the Night Stalkers for a bit. I look forward to that as well. We might do some more work on one of the Night Stalker models today, actually, depending if we have some time when we're waiting for some paint. Handy to have multiple projects on the go at the same time for that reason. As long as you don't overwhelm yourself, just a ridiculous amount of stuff on the table. And when you're doing the bases separately as well, you also have the option of working on bits of the base, letting that dry, working on bits of the model, letting that dry, going back to the base, and so on. It just makes you more efficient. Okay, I'm going to give the brush a bit of a rinse now, just to make sure we're not letting any of this paint dry on it. And then we're going to move on to this big, juicy lava area here. By the way, serious question. If I was to order a big pile of dice, either in orange or in another colour like black with orange pips on it, what word for the number 6 would most inspire you to purchase it? Would it be juicy, tasty, spicy, sizzling? What would you be most likely to go for? I'm considering doing something like that. But you have to order quite a lot of them. Worth it. I'm going to gauge the interest. And definitely I wouldn't put a word on the 1 and the 6. That would be crazy. Be banned putting things on the 1. Looking at you, GW. GW just have no interdepartmental consistency though. Most of their dice have the symbols on the 1, but I believe their Forge World dice have the symbols on the 6. Which is just a nightmarish scenario. Wake up in sweats just thinking. That is true, Kim. If there is a Remington set of dice, it would have to be on the 1. Mr. Remington is well known for all the 1s. While screaming the word Remington at the top, you have to go on the 1 there. That's the one exception I would allow. Nearly done with this base now, and all that will remain after that is to install fairly straightforward. Just going over to make sure I haven't missed any bits here. I think this base is going to look very nice when it's done with all these on it as well. Available now from Bad Squiddo Games. I think they're in the Bad Squiddo Scenics. Build terrain with or put on your base. Still got quite a few left. I'm on my second set of. Depending if I add anything else to this army in the future, I may end up firing a third. As you go over to try and fix any mistakes in this, you can kind of drag the paint around as it starts to set. You don't want to be doing too much. You've got to be careful with it. And any that's hooked out to the side, are just going to that off. Don't want that to be there. I think are done here. Oh no, there's a little bit of red there. It's always important to look from different. And now we're done. Now we are. Okay, so that looks very, very black right now. I'm going to put that off to the side, and then maybe in a couple of hours we'll have seen some crackling. Not, then definitely tomorrow. So let's put Mordant Earth away. Very useful paint. So Deep Red thinks Moist should go on the dice. Sturat says it's hard to argue with Moist. Okay, well, Moist is the popular choice at the moment. I'm not sure whether Moist really gives off the kind of vibe I'm going for, though. It depends, because obviously at the end of the day, you've just got to give the people what they want. They want moisture. Try to argue. Just soaping off this brush now. And we're done with that brush now. And we're going to move on to phase 1 of painting these grotesques now. So it's quite a few different stages, but most of them are easy. So who should we start with? Let's start with the champion. Very impressive looking. Before I do that, I'm actually going to put the base that I just painted even further away so I can't accidentally touch it while it's drying. So bring up some space on the shelf behind me, so that can go up there. Go, nice and out of the way. Got more space to put these suckers now. Okay, Deep Red loves moist, loves it moist of all. Well, it is the moist important thing, isn't it? Okay, so we're going to require the dry brush. In this case, the Citadel medium dry brush. And the plan here is to dry brush the whole thing in white, at which point we will then go in with, where is it? Gryph-hound orange contrast paint over the entire thing, and then we'll have a kind of orangey browny look to the whole model, at which point we then start dry brushing in orange and then dry brush in yellow. So several different stages, and if you want to see roughly what it'll look like, if you've seen my Overmaster on Ancient Winged Half-Breed, if you've seen the face of that model, that's the effect I'm going for. So it'll be kind of a reddy, orangey, browny, yellowy look. So we don't need the contrast paint now. We need to get dry brushing away with white. I think this white might be empty actually. Another one. Right there. Dead white. So not a totally ridiculous dry brush. This is just going to give a kind of undercurrent of different colours underneath the dry brushing that goes on to finish the job. And they get progressively lighter, the dry brushes, as you go on. So this is going to be quite a heavy one. So giving this a good shake. Sean Blake misses the Andy and Rem show. Well, you don't have to wait too long. If you actually tune in tonight, in about 5 hours and 15 minutes, then Andy and Rem will be playing Vermintide, and we will be doing a regular show at some point soon as well. So I expect to see you there tonight for that red hot sizzling rat slaying action. So we've got some white out. We might need some more since we're doing 6 of these models right now. And we're going to start the dry brushing process. So getting rid of most of the paint on the brush. And focusing on mainly the skin here. These things are mostly skin. It doesn't matter if we stray onto anything else, because obviously we haven't painted any other parts yet. This guy's got quite a bit more armour on him than any of the other Grotesques, since he is a champion. Doesn't even matter if you're a bit too heavy with your dry brush at this stage, because it's all going to be underneath anyway. There's several layers to go after this. Really oranged up and browned up and redded up and faded up. So even bits where you're not sure it's going to look that fleshy at the end, you can still go onto them. I'm not sure about his weapons, exactly what colour they're going to end up. This one looks like it's very much growing out of his eye. That might end up being mostly flesh coloured. I'm going to treat this the same as the flesh for now, and then later, so be it. When was the last time you guys played some AOS? The last time I played some AOS, you'd probably figure it out by looking at the playlist of AOS battle reports on this channel, because I did make a battle report of every game I played. So it was probably over a year ago. I think I had it at Warhammer World. Quite a while since I played a game of Age of Sigmar in my own. if somebody nearby wanted to play, obviously when the lockdown is over, then I would definitely be interested in that. But I haven't been actively seeking it out as much as I have Kings of War because of the very active tournament scene that I've been in. Quite funny when you're doing a painting process like this and you reach a point like now, you've just dry brushed white over the whole thing, and you think, you know what, I've actually seen people running paint jobs very similar to how this is now at tournaments. I think some people just obviously paint their armies very, very quickly. Some models do just take to a quick dry brush and they're basically done. Almost finished with the initial stages of the dry brush here. Tim says, +1 for the Indian Room Show, truly riveting content. Well, it will be back, so don't worry. I'm going to try to arrange a full Andean Rim Show episode this week, or within the next 7 days anyway. And I'm going to be playing some Vermintide in the meantime. See, I'm going quite heavy on the dry brush here. Don't have to be too neat with it. We're almost to the point of calling this guy done with the dry brushing. On to the next guy. We're all done like this. Then you can actually see the detail coming out quite nicely with the dry brushing, aren't you? Already. Owen says, did you get your gift yet? I did not. Still waiting for that to arrive. I'm sure when that arrives, I will talk about it. Okay, so he's done the dry brushing now. Let's move on to the next guy, which is going to be him. He's only got 1 foot on this base, but it is double pinned. So there are 2 pins coming out of a single foot here. Still got stability, which is particularly important either for dry brushing because you're kind of violently attacking the model with a brush and it can bounce around, or detail work when you don't want the model to move, mess up your precision. Stability. Is that an insect you've just dry brushed? It's not. It's a grotesque. This guy is particularly grotesque. It looks like his feet are pointing backward. Backwards by traditional standards, at least. I'm sure there are creatures out there that do. So I'm thinking this guy's going to be a bit quicker than the last one. because he's got less mass to him. There's less legs for a start. Some more. And taking off most of it. Move like that ring film. Yes. They move like horrifying Japanese little girls. Very common trope, isn't it, in Japanese horror? The little girl with the hair covering. Dry brushing the groinal area here. Always a source of excitement. Going to be fully completing the flesh before we move on to any accessories on these guys. Like I said, there's a lot of dry brushing and just going to contaminate nearby areas. So if we'd already painted those, we'd just be making a right old mess of them right now. Everything else is going to be done last, which also means you have to be very careful not to stray onto the skin with any. It's a similar painting method to what I used on my lesser obsidian golem. Except they are progressively from grey to white with the dry, then a black wash, which tones it down and ties it together and stops it looking so weird and stark. Dry, I know. Okay. Who's next? This guy. Kim says, Henry, you should try a dry brush using a makeup brush. Costs about the same as a GW dry brush, or just steal one. Yeah. Potentially. Back in the day, I used to dry brush with brushes that I'd worn out and didn't have a point anymore. So I couldn't really use them for other painting technique. Just like pictures of some of the things I painted when I was younger. Some of them were truly awful, and some of them actually looked pretty cool. When I discovered washes, things started to improve, and I had some green, light green Space Marines that looked very nice. some scouts. So I would have liked to still have those, but I sold them. I didn't think I was ever going to play 40k ever again at the time. I was only interested in getting back into Warhammer Fantasy, so I kept my dwarves and sold everything else. And then, years later, obviously, I ended up playing everything, buying a zillion different, all different kinds of game systems. That's what it does, it just grabs you firmly by the unmentionables and doesn't let go until it's squeezed all the money out. The unmentionables being your wallet, of course. Oh, and I almost forgot about that Centaur comment about forces of nature and a news article about new plastic miniatures with plastic fawns and hearts. I've heard of Atlantic Miniatures. I may have seen their products posted on Facebook before. I don't think I've looked into it much though. There are a lot of companies out there that make some very nice stuff. What I like to see from a company is if they fill a crevice that another game company has left in one of their army lists. I want a model that can fill that void, or I want them to have rules for their model. Just have tons of companies pumping out very similar stuff, then I'm typically going to go for the company whose game I want to play. Even if they don't have rules limiting you specifically to their models. Like with Mantic, for example, you can use whatever you want, but there are potential perks taking actual Mantic on. For example, if you finish really high at a Kings event, you might win a trip around the world to a Clash of Kings in another part of, but only if you have fully 190% Mantic. So anytime I attend a Clash of Kings event, I would most likely attempt to take an army that's within their criteria. Because even though it's not that likely that any one specific person is going to win the event, on the off chance that you do win, you want to be eligible for the best prizes. I think at the most recent Clash of Kings, it's possible I could have done better there if I'd taken my goblins rather than busting out the Abyssal Dwarves early. But I'm pleased that I did take the Abyssal Dwarves because I think the fact that they look good has earned me more respect in the community in terms of hitting ability than the goblins ever did, because they're very basic. Not a lot of effort gone into the goblins in terms, especially when compared to my more recent art. This guy's almost dry brush. Okay, who's next? Let's move on to this guy. This is my favourite reposed grotesque. It's very seamless. Really can't tell that his arm isn't supposed to be in that position. Very easy conversion. If you saw the previous videos, you'll see how that was done. Okay, let's start dry brushing this chump. There is something to be said for traditional centaurs versus angry dwarf centaurs. I think both have their place. I did notice that Mantic started stocking Vallejo game colour paints on their website at a very competitive price, I might add. So I was actually going to place an order, but I haven't built up my cart enough yet to get the free postage. I need to wait until I want to order enough stuff. I do need some paints. I need an orange because this one is upside down because there's not much left in it. And I want to get some purples and pinks as well. Night Stalkers. Pondering ordering the Gamers edition of the version 3 rulebook, taking to tournaments and such, since it's obviously much lighter, gigantic hardback one. I think it's about £20 on the Mantic website right now. Although, if I was going to do that, would I just buy the starter set, where you get that book? You also get Night Stalkers and the Northern Alliance. I think that's about 60. It depends. If I could find someone to buy the Northern Alliance part of it off me, then it would definitely be worth it. Nearly finished dry brushing this guy. After I finish this one, I'll give you a bit of a close-up of him. See it in focus to see how it looks at this stage. Okay, so just a bit on his shoulder. Okay, let's get him right up to the camera so you can see close up. So that's how it looks at the moment with the dry brush on it. Butt cheeks region. So of course it's not going to look like this when it's finished in any way, shape or form, because we're going to be doing washes, contrasts, dry brushing in other colours, and it'll look very different when it's complete. And next, 2 more left, and then we'll do a different. I'm going to start titling these videos better starting today, because I don't think Lockdown Hobby Time Part 5 sounds that attractive to people. If you notice, actually, a lot of YouTube channels out there don't number things. Apparently, when there's something in the psychology of it, whenever you see a series and you see an episode number, you kind of stop and think, well, do I really want to watch episode 90? Shouldn't I start at 1? But then they don't feel like starting at 1, so they just don't watch it at all. There is some psychology in that. So a lot of people either no longer or just don't number their episodes in any particular series anymore. I name this one something like I've done today, which is, I believe, painting Abyssal Dwarf Grotesques. It's the first thing people are going to see, and they'll think, oh, that's just an episode about painting those snazzy new models. I'll go and check that out. And then at the end, I'll put the episode number. So we'll see if that gets a boost in viewership. It's new titling technique. Or we could just call it the Dry Brushing Show, featuring Abyssal Dwarf Grotesques. Or dusting, as Mr. Remington. Revolutionary technique. Though I wouldn't take too much painting advice from Mr. Remington. Not because he's not a good painter, but he doesn't use any varnish or anything. Models get chipped, especially when he transports them in a plastic bag. So much time into painting them. Just doesn't care for them. Maybe you can take technical advice from him, not aftercare advice. Owen says, I watch your show when I'm preparing dinner since chef industry is dead from virus. I do more complex meals. Speak. Good idea. Good for anyone who's able during these difficult times to do something to themselves sharp or improve themselves in some way. Anyone who's able to do that, then that's going to be a way to get some positive out of this situation. Of course, the most important thing is just surviving. I'm sure that all family survive. But if you do anything on top of that, then good on you. Tim is going to bed because it's late in Australia. Well, good night, and I'm sure you'll tune in and watch the rest of this ting later on. One more guy to dry brush after this, and then we'll do something possibly more exciting, although I'm not making this because right. The most annoying thing about pandemic for me, when I say most annoying thing, I mean this thing that's a slight annoyance rather than something seriously worrying. It's a whole separate category. Slight annoyance is the lack of sport. Because I like to do all my exercise pretty much in the living room, in the TV, watching sport. So while there isn't any sport, then find alternative to watch instead. And sport tends to be handy. I just find it convenient because they usually have a clock running for a start, so exactly how much exercise I'm doing. And particular football, or soccer as the Americans, length of a half 45 minutes. Pretty much the perfect amount of time I like to be doing any particular exercise. So it lines up nicely. Whereas if I'm watching some kind of programming, especially if it's on Netflix actually, I've noticed that because they're not confined by time slots and advertising breaks, sometimes they'll have an episode that's 38 minutes, then they'll have an episode that's 54 minutes. So that's not ideal for my purposes. Okay, one more guy to dry brush and that's it. One thing that's important to do during these times, if you're active on social media, is just basically keep an eye on anyone you think might be struggling in isolation. And maybe if that just means looking down your friends list every few days and thinking, I haven't seen much from this person for a while, I'll just check in with them. That's a good way to start, because in a time like this, when there's not that much going on in the world, and it's easy to kind of fly under the radar and drift away and not interact with the world and just let everything pass you by. Some people, that's not really a good idea, to just let huge amounts of time pass without doing anything. Drag some people down. So, worth keeping an eye on anyone that you think vulnerable at these times. Anyone else working on anything miniature-wise today? Nearly done with this guy now. Deep red, prepping some elf cavalry. What kind of elf cavalry would that be? Skeptical. So it's just finished a load of Walking Dead board game zombies and just starting on the characters. Those are nice models, Walking Dead ones. I've got a few of them from various Mantic sources, including the isolation box, which I ordered. I've traded away some of the heroes, but I'm keeping the zombies. They're pretty multi-purpose. I don't actually play the Walking Dead game at this point. Something I would consider it though. I do like the models and I've heard good things about the rules. So I wouldn't rule it out in the future. Obviously I'm a fan of Mantic products in general. The Mantic community around their games. Always on the peripheral of my thoughts. Red. There are Kitbasher, Fireforge, Teutonic Knights, and North Star Elf Infantry. I would be interested to see that. And what are you going to be using them for? Painting purple for Dark Elf. Well, I'm going to be diving into purple heavily soon. If you look at the start of this Night Stalker colour scheme concept here. This guy's obviously nowhere near finished. Playing Oathmark. I've heard of it. Don't know too much about it yet. But if it has elf cavalry in it, sounds good to me. There have been a lot of fantasy games up and then kind of disappear again. What have happened to Rune Wars? That was supposed to be the next big thing. Seems to have died a total death. It says, I want the light elf infantry when they're released as a part of a nature army for Dragon Rampant. I've heard of that as well. I think we're pretty much as dry brushed up as we can be here. So, moving to one side for the moment. And what we could actually do, could do some dry brushing on this guy. Although I'm really tempted to wait until I get some nice pink paints to work on him. Some really nice highlights. So, hesitant to dive in there with a dry brush right now. Might wait for. So, let's wash off the dry brush for now. Skeptical says, agreed about Walking Dead, All Out War and Call to Arms. The figures I'm doing at the moment are for the No Sanctuary board game, so series characters rather than the comic. As far as Walking Dead goes, my only knowledge of that is from the games. Played the first 2 seasons and I just bought the New Frontier and the final season, I think they're called, Steam. Played them yet. I do enjoy the series. It's not the kind of series that I would play twice, mind you, because it's one of those illusion of choice games. So you think you've got a choice in which characters to save, but then a couple of hours later the character that you chose to save, because there was a possibility they could have died, they didn't want to invest too much time in that character, so then they just get killed by something else later. So you feel like you have lots of choices when you're playing it the first time, but if you play it again, you realise that actually you don't have any choices at all. So I think all the Telltale games are best only played once for that reason. You can at least pretend that you were choosing your own. Played a lot of games in that genre. I think the first one I played wasn't a Telltale game, it would have been Life is Strange probably, and that's really good. Then after that, that inspired me to try more games in that domain. So I played the 2 Walking Dead games. What else is similar? I played The Descendant on Steam, which is a similar kind of thing, only not quite as polished. And any other games in that? The Wolf Among Us as well. Played that on Steam. Good. There's a ton of them though. Okay, so we've done the dry brushing. What shall we do now? We could go back to the start and apply the contrast paint to them right now, because it is dry brush, so it should be completely dry by now. But we might just give them a little bit longer, just to make absolutely sure. Let's have a look at the bases that we painted before. You can actually see that the earth is starting to crackle there. Look at that already. So on this side, you can see the effect is very clear already. On this side, not so much yet, just starting to creep in around the edges. And when it dries fully, oh, look, something like that. It does take a while though, so maybe we'll be able to see at the end that one might be completed. And says even if Oakmark isn't going to be an enduring massive range of figures that are out, it'll be around for quite some time. Well, hopefully, because I think the fantasy mass battle genre needs some addition in there. We still have no idea what GW are going to do in that department when it comes to the old world. They have said they're going back to square bases in a few years, but that might be a Forge World only range and might get limited rulebook, or it could just be a full-on back to the old world. Here's a huge release, and we're going to heavily support this. So, should that happen, will Warhammer Fantasy be able to come in and just sweep up all the other game systems? I would imagine something like the 9th Age would suffer the most, since I would imagine 100% of their player base are Warhammer Fantasy refugees, if you will, who are looking for something to continue playing Warhammer in. And I think most of them would probably jump on any new Warhammer Fantasy game. Kings of War kind of had a loyal fan base before Fantasy did. So, see you with that. And other games kind of skirting around the edges. A lot of them seem to have dried up and died without any hugely stiff competition. I would be very interested if Warhammer Fantasy comes back in any kind of recognisable form, though. The actual rules, I don't think, after I've played Kings of War, I don't think the Warhammer Fantasy rules were good in the last few editions, at least. But they were fun, and I did enjoy playing it. Whether I would still enjoy it to the same extent after playing Kings of War for over 100 games, 200 if I'm not there already, after playing that many games of Kings of War, then maybe a more convoluted and backward system wouldn't sit well. So I don't think they could just release something that's too similar to the last Fantasy edition. They're going to go that way. I think they would have to streamline it a bit. Whether they just directly rip off ideas from Kings of War or any of the other upstart games do that, who knows? I'm sure plans are afoot already. I think the main thing with Warhammer Fantasy is that they have the initial footing of having huge interest in the world in general, in the old world. A lot of fluff built around that, a lot of very successful IP spin-offs. You've got your PC games, Total War Warhammer, the obvious one. It's obviously a big following. And I think those things are keeping the old world just simmering just below the surface. And if they do burst back onto the scene with a big release, could potentially big. But we'll see. Only one way to find out, and it's going to be a few years yet, apparently. Okay. Contrast Gryph-hound Orange. So now, go back to the guy that we dry brushed first, champion, and we're going to apply this all over his body. And then we're going to let that dry. So giving it a good shake. And we will use this brush again. Don't need much precision here. And we're going to put it into the Citadel paint holder, in fact. Let's get rid of the white contrast paint out of there. And put the orange one in. Because these paints are very thin, we don't want them falling over and spilling everywhere. It would be funny if it spilt while in the Citadel paint holder. I do like this paint holder actually. I'm sure there are other devices on the market, or you could just make something that does a similar job. But it does work as advertised. So it's all over the body. It's going to be the start of the colour that you will see at the end when it's finished. Some of this colour will still be visible. Probably get the same effect with various washes or contrast paints. Sure to hit everything that is supposed to be skin here. And also I like really easy painting methods like this that don't require too much precision, the majority of it. Because you get a lot done quickly, and once there's a lot of painting done on the model already, I find that it motivates me a lot when it comes to doing the later part. The skin's totally finished, then I feel like the model is half done already. Even if time-wise it's not half, it feels like it. You can really see. So I get extra motivation to finish painting the rest of it, even if that bit takes longer. Feels like you're just making really good progress when you find a nice easy technique, large part. Almost done with it. Not missed any bits. And here's how it looks at the moment. So actually at that angle it looks really bizarre now because it's so wet and shiny. When it dries, it will look a lot better. One down. Next. Really looking forward to getting these. I know people have had really good success with Grotesques. So it's a combination of that and just knowing models are so damn cool. It's double motivation for me painting these. I think they look great. Triple motivation if you factor in that I think the way I'm painting is also going to help be confident in your ability to make something look good. It's going to inspire you to paint rather than if you're tentatively approaching something, hesitant as to how it's going to turn out. Princess got to go, but it's like the torso work so far. Hopefully you'll like it even more when it's we may be able to finish the flesh on these guys tomorrow, since the wash will definitely dry by the rest of it's just dry brushing. And we can definitely finish the base tomorrow. Bases. I'm doing a little bit underneath the foot on some of these. Some of them, both feet don't necessarily have to touch the ground, so you may actually be able to see the bottom of the feet. Some of them. To make sure the bottom of the foot isn't just completely black. Okay, who's next? This bad boy. Too long this one. Still got 10 people in here at the moment, so that's nice. I'm not sure whether I'll continue doing this type of content after lockdown is finished, but ability. I may not do it every day after that point, but it does get me painting quicker, and I can spread the paint love with, well, share some of my mid-level paint. A running theme on my channel is basically giving away ideas, tips, either tactics or painting. tactics, I know some players would be hesitant to give up their winning strategy, but that's not really the way I look at it. I do it more as there's an experience and skill gap between the top players and the lower players. So I'm not going to call myself a top player, even though I think I'm currently second in the ranking. But there are definitely, top of my head, there's at least a handful of people I know have more Kings of War skill than I do. So whatever I happen to pick up playing in these events, I want everyone to know these little tricks, so that not only the top players, but everyone else will have to start coming up with new ideas. If everyone knows what to look out for, it'll force players to evolve their playstyle. A few times at tournaments I've had people come up to me and tell me that they just used a particular trick they got from watching one of my. Okay, he is done. And next. They actually look really good on camera at this stage. They look better on camera than they do in person when they're just dry brushed in white. Stu Rat is back, by the way, in the house. Everyone needs a good rat around their house now and then. I don't think we've ever had any rats that I've noticed around these. A few slugs. Some people are very big on pet rat. They're quite intelligent. Skeptical. With Abyssal Dwarves, is there a particular army that you don't like to see across the table? Lots of fast mobile stuff, for example. Yes, there are things that I don't like to see across the table. Depending what I've taken in my list, of course, affects that. But I mostly run huge, big blobs of unkillable, slow stuff. So when I say unkillable, I mean difficult to shift, especially if you lack piercing and crushing strength. So if I come up against lots of piercing shooting, for instance, that can be an issue. Something like ogre shooters, let's say. They have lots of piercing, so they can definitely do some serious damage to my units that I consider really difficult to kill. And if I chase after ogre shooters with somebody like Susu, then ogre shooters aren't that concerned about Susu, because they've actually got a reasonable chance of taking her out. Because they're ogres, obviously, so they can pack a punch even when they're not shooting. However, ogres are one of the armies I do like to see if I'm taking artillery, because I can just put my artillery behind my small infantry, and then I can see over them at every single ogre unit. There are a couple of situations where I see the enemy's army list combined with a scenario and think, okay, I've lost before the game's even started. Like, for example, an army full of scouting units on one of the scenarios where you have to reach the centre line and grab objectives. And if they go first, it's happened to me a couple of times where my opponent's scouted up units, gone first, grabbed the objective, run away, and then I haven't had enough speed to actually chase them down to collect the objectives off them by the end of the game. So it depends on the tournament scoring system as well, because if it heavily rewards killing rather than actual scenario play, then I wouldn't mind facing that. Because I'm most likely to win the fight if they're tying up units running off with objectives. But there isn't usually one particular army type where I think, oh no, I'm totally toast. Unless it's a scenario combo. Just magnifies any possible issues. Things like multiple dragons are always scary to look at across the table. But it depends what I've taken. If I've taken my big flyer and Basuzu, for instance, then they're going to be limited in where they can leave themselves safely and still threaten me. And if they don't hurry up and actually get into the fight, then I've got my artillery pointed at them. Just spotted something stuck to this guy's foot that isn't supposed to be there. I don't know what it is, maybe a bit of tissue or something. I just dropped a knife. So I'm going to carefully snip that out of there. And then contrast over that point, and hopefully it won't be too obvious. If it is, I'll just have to paint over it later. When you're painting something, it does sometimes bring up, especially mold lines can come up after you've primed something. Like after I primed one of these guys, I noticed that there was still a little bit of a connection left on his chin that had to come off. So I had to re-prime that area with a brush. I think with my Abyssal Dwarf armies, more often than not, it's my opponent that looks at my army and thinks, oh no, how am I going to deal with that? Than me thinking about my opponent's army. Oscar wants to know if I'm going to be doing any Dead Zone content by the sounds of it, and yes. I am going to be building another Dead Zone rain board. But I kind of put those thoughts on hold. Decided to work on these first. But that is one of the next in line, definitely. Got a lot of the elements I need to build that. And, depending how motivated I am, if I continue to do these videos and lockdown lasts for a while and I actually get lots painted in quick time, then I may move on to painting some Dead Zone Forge Fathers that I've had, most of which were very kindly sent to me. I've done a bit of painting on them. They're nowhere near finished yet. They could be something I move on to. See how it goes. I enjoy Dead Zone, honestly. Just don't play it as much as King's Fall. I think this guy is well. Okay, so let's have a look at him close up while he's Still wet. Incredibly hideous. I think great. And we've just got one more now, which is this one, which looks really cool on camera. So yeah, if you're planning to do anything on camera with miniatures, maybe consider dry brushing them like this. It does bring out all the detail nicely for the camera. It just doesn't look that great actually in person. People need their fix of Dead Zone apparently. Well, keep your eyes peeled, or it'll fairly soon. Yes, Stu, the last thing you see is going to be a Grotesques hideous face advancing on you, salivating, respect, rending your flesh and grinding your bones to dust. Grotesques are just hideously violent abominations. Going very nicely, yes they are. Considering they were just naked resin this morning, soon they're actually going to look like quite far along in the paint. Not much. There are people out there that paint way faster than me actually who can do everything by now and still standard. I don't know how they do it. They're just machines. For anyone who just joined, I'm using the Gryph-hound Orange paint here over black primer and white dry brushing over the whole model. It's the basis for the flesh colour. There's going to be more done to them dry, but for now, this is all we're going to do. So probably just going to do this layer on the Grotesques today. Something else in a minute. It's actually wobbling about quite a bit on this handle I've made for it, so I'm actually going to either bend the pins that are holding him to it underneath so it can't wobble, or put some blue tack under there. May hold him in place because he's not very heavy. When I get down to the detail painting, I don't want him going back and forth. Like he nearly fell out there. Almost. He's done. That'll be all of the orange contrast paint. The Grotesques finish. Any hair attached to one of his spikes somehow. So let's get the Okay. Done. Closing the lid. Soap off this brush a bit. For everyone who wasn't here when I announced it earlier, there is going to be an episode of Andy and Rem play Vermintide later on, in about 4 hours' time. For anyone who's into that kind of thing, or just into in Rem's show, perhaps. And put these contrast paints to one side now. Make sure leave any lids open. So let's have a look at this guy while he's wet. What's the optimum focus position? There we go. Very wet, so obviously he won't look like that when he's finished because it's very shiny at the moment. Let's see if anyone's dried off a bit. Let's look at the first guy I did, who's drying off quite nicely. Get much of a feel for the colours on him. You know what? Let's just put a box behind him. Okay, so that's how he looks at the moment. And the back. But it doesn't like focus extreme. It doesn't really give you the best impression, this camera, because it's quite shiny at the moment while it's wet. But trust me, in person, it is looking nice right now. Looking exactly like I wanted. Although I have just spotted a bit that doesn't look like it's been reddened. A little bit underneath his leg that I may have missed. So we are going to open the paint again and dive in there quick before he's completely dry. Careful not to mess with any of the parts that are in the process of drying, of course. You'd never be able to see this part of the model. But I'd know. Okay. Now we're done with that. There's evidence of black spray paint earlier. Okay, so we're finished with the grotesques for now because there's drying to be had. Let's see how the base is coming up. This is the Grotesque Champion's base. A bit more progress on the crackling effect here as it dries. See, it's starting to look more like it's supposed to now. It still takes a while before it's totally finished. And when it's finished, it looks like this one here. See, it's still got a little way to go before it fully dries and ends up like that. There you go. So it's getting there slowly. And what about the big giant base? Let's have a look at that one as well. So this one's probably going to take even longer, but it's actually getting there. See that you can see that you can see, yeah, you can see the lava is slowly starting to become visible through that blackness that was there before. Not too long for that to dry as well, but it usually takes a few hours before it's completely dry in every possible area. It fully separates, so you don't want to start reapplying it thinking it's not going to work properly. Just give it time. Okay, what do we want to look at? Tempted to do something with this guy, but I really want to wait. I'm going to make another one because I've got this guy's legs to work with. Let's see. Stu says that guy could take a rider. If you're talking about the Grotesques, then they certainly could. I think I've asked you before, but heard of, played Wolsong, miniature game, not the... It rings a bell, but I haven't played. What kind of genre is it? And is it good? So when I'm making the second one of these guys, I'm going to chop this guy's legs off, use the top half of his body for something else, and use his legs to make this guy's brother. That's going to be very exciting, and I'm going to try not to slice my finger off when I cut him this time. When I say off, I just mean it was deeply wounded, which has healed up nicely now because it was over a week ago. So that's going to be a fun experience for everybody. Now, so let's see. Still got the Hellfane sitting here because I haven't put the barriers around the edge yet, and I'll work on that after I've finished the Grotesques thing. I may start it before they're totally finished, but I don't think this is going to be too easily difficult. Even though it's big and it's a complex model, the style of painting I'm going to use on them is the same as my obsidian golems on the rhino parts of it, rock rhino, and then on the platform there's going to be lots of gold and silver, which won't take that long either. It's going to be not as difficult as it might look. However, this will be difficult to paint. I've made myself an awful lot of work with this guy. This Shadow Hulk that I've made, Night Stalker's giant kit with dragon heads, arms coming out the dragon, pillars, tentacles, faces, green stuff faces everywhere, tentacles poking out, little arms poking out. It's just going to be a lot of work to get this painted, which is why I want to paint the Dread Fiend first to test out the colour scheme. I don't want to start painting that thing. He's just going to sit there for a while. Apparently the game that was mentioned is steampunk. I think it's awesome and would say it's likely the people who fancy Dead Zone will also song as well. Gameplay wise, even if steampunk is... I've played some games that are vaguely steampunk in nature. It can be argued that Relics is a steampunk game, although I think it was actually described as stitch punk was the phrase used. Main factions was a lot of puppets. As far as full-on steampunk, I don't think I've really majorly got into any game that could be considered as 100% steampunk, but I know there are lots of them out there. An aesthetic that's very common in the miniature world. So, what should I do now? I could actually, while this lava effect on here is drying, I could put some orange on these crystals. Not really much else I can do at the moment while I'm waiting for those Grotesques to dry. So let's stick some orange on these crystals So I'm going to put some orange onto this little plastic bag here. As wargamers, we always end up with little plastic bags that contain components. So make use of them as little pallets if there's no other purpose in mind for them. I put a little bit of water in there because it's quite thick. I'm going to take probably 2 coats on top of this brown for the crystals. So let's start with this one. It's come out quite a bit thinner than I was anticipating. Brush, I think. But it'll be fine. Making it too thick. I'm going to be up with orange and just to be some sand around these crystals that was obviously dry. That. Although how careful I need to be, I'm not 100% sure on some of these crystals. There's going to be grotesques standing around them, so you won't be able to see them that clearly. Once I finish these crystals, maybe even just the first coat, I'll consider wrapping this one up. Just waiting things to dry at the moment. There's going to be another broadcast later. Skeptical to go now. Yes, see you tomorrow most likely, probably. Yeah, doing some more painting, and we'll go on to the next stage of the skin. Grotesques. Exciting. And these bases should definitely be finished. Well, I suppose the one that doesn't have any crystals on it is already finished. We're just waiting for the effect to connect, as it were. After a couple of coats of this orange onto the brown, the next stage is making a lighter orange and then edge highlighting the crystals. And then if I make a mess of that, just taking the original orange colour and anyone who wasn't here when I was discussing the origins of this base, then the reason I'm doing a horde base for these grotesques instead of 2 regiments is that I don't feel like I can fit 3 of them onto 1 regiment. And I need to have 5 in the total. I want it to meet the 3rd model count standard. So the only way I could feasibly get 5 of them on there is to base them up. And checking out the rules for them, mostly want to run a horde anyway. There are some units in the game where a troop or a regiment is considered more small than a horse. There is, of course, the issue of unlock. In my Abyssal Dwarf army, I'm constantly struggling with unlocks. One of the reasons why I haven't put up any slave orcs yet, because I struggle so much for unlocks, I can't justify painting up an irregular unit. It says stop feeding them. The problem. I think you're referring to. Well, does the problem really go away if you stop feeding them? I imagine eventually they would riot, or the authorities would get. So you're just creating a problem. Done with the first. No. Crystals from Bad Squiddo Games. Bases themselves, I think I got from War Bases. I've started ordering most of my bases in 3mm now rather than 2mm. Go back and look at pictures of my undead halfling army that was based on 2mm bases, then see that quite a lot of warping takes place. So I'm thinking thicker bases, probably less chance of warp, possibly. Almost. This going to stop for the evening. At some point tonight, I might do the last layer of orange, so we can tomorrow. Slightly more process. Okay, that'll do for now. Get the idea of where we're heading with this now. Any last minute comments or questions, you better drop them in right now because we're going to end the video very shortly. Give people a minute or two. last minute thoughts, guys? Just going to soap down this brush a bit. Hope everyone's liking this video, by the way, as in clicking the like button on it. Not then, what kind of subscriber are you? Dead Gamer is catching this broadcast while at work. Well, the broadcast is about to end, but in about 4 hours there is going to be Andy and Rem play Vermintide episode 2 live. So you can make yourself available in about 4 hours time. Then you might want to check that one out for some red hot sizzling rat slaying action. Yeah, the show is about to end. This one is anyway. But there's plenty more coming in. In fact, before I go, I'm going to show everyone what I was working on today. Then we'll wrap it up. So, painting some Abyssal Dwarf Grotesques, and this is where we're at right now. So let's get him right under there. So he's not really this colour because it doesn't show up that well on camera here because it's a bit shiny and the camera's a bit too much detail. But you're getting the idea there, aren't you? So we dry brushed it, then we applied contrast paint all over it so it's looking nice and reddy brown, and then we're going to do more dry brushing tomorrow. We might be able to finish the flesh tomorrow, then we can start working on the details after that. So all the grotesques, a good start made on them. Also, just about finished these bases, not much to do on them at all. Just waiting for the crackling effects to go through properly there, which you'll be able to see in all its glory tomorrow. And I'm going to wrap this one up then. So don't forget to check out all the links in the description, all the social media madness down there, my Facebook group, Twitter and so on. And there's also the various fundraising sources down there. You want to pledge your entire life savings per month on Patreon, which is always very welcome, of course. And my dream, of course, is to earn so much via Patreon that I can get the vault of gold coins and then go swimming in them. But I think I would need somewhere in the region of where I could afford that vault. Probably at the same level people have pledged at the moment, I would probably need more than 1 million patrons to approach getting that kind of structure in place and filling it with the gold coins, which might be the most difficult part there. But it's a long-term goal, and I think we can work towards it. $1 at a time. And remember, in less than 4 hours time, live Vermintide, Andy and Rem killing rats, most likely getting killed by rats as well, so that's going to be fun. And do another one of these videos tomorrow afternoon as well if people want to see the conclusion of the flesh of the grotesques, so keep your eyes peeled and we'll work on some other stuff also. Okay, all that remains to be said before I end this video is good night out there, whatever you are.